Hey everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to Cinefessions, where we talk all things media. So way back in the late 20-aughts, the Hunger Games trilogy ended up taking the world by storm. For whatever reason, that teen dystopic future just grabbed the country and people loved it. The other thing that was very popular at the time was adapting books into film adaptations, which is exactly what happened with the Hunger Games, and it was extremely successful. So whenever you have a successful thing like that, then that usually sparks a bunch of other similar things like it. And one of the things that came out of the Hunger Games was today's video topic, the Maze Runner Trilogy. So these films, all three of them, were directed by Wes Ball. The first one came out in 2014, and then the series concluded 5 years ago with 2018's Maze Runner: The Death Cure. So when this one was coming out, that's actually the first time I watched through the entire trilogy, and I really enjoyed it the first time through. I thought, why isn't more people talking about this franchise? Well, my wife and I recently decided, let's revisit it, see, one, does it hold up? Is it still as good as I remember it being? And does it deserve to have more people talking about it? Well, let's talk about it today, and I'll give you my thoughts on it. So before we get into this, though, if you guys have a second, please hit that like button down below. That engagement really does help me out. But with that said, let's not waste any more time at all. Let's dive right in to my review of the Maze Runner Trilogy. Before we get into it, just one word of warning. Typically speaking, I don't put any spoilers in any of my reviews. That said, this is a series review, and so it's really impossible for me to talk about the second and third movie without me giving away what happens at the end of the first movie. So that said, there will be spoilers. I would suggest, if you've not seen this trilogy yet, stop this video now, go watch it, and then come back and watch my thoughts on the trilogy. If you don't care about this series at all, and you don't care about spoilers, please proceed. But you have been warned, there will be spoilers for the Maze Runner trilogy in this review. Normally when I talk about full series on this channel, I like to do a rank and review where I start with my least favorite and then go up to my favorite. But this time around, because of the way this trilogy is, where it's literally the second one is picking up where the first one ends, and same thing with the third one, picks up where the second one ends, it's just hard to talk about them out of order. So instead, I'll go through all three of them in order, and then at the end, I'll give you a ranking of the series, just for the heck of it. So we're going to start today with number one in the trilogy, 2014's The Maze Runner. And as I mentioned earlier, this entire trilogy is directed by Wes Ball, who, frankly, I think does a remarkable job with this trilogy. So in the first one here, and I'll also mention, I'm assuming you're probably familiar with these movies, and so you're already familiar with the plots, but just to give a quick synopsis, basically, this film opens up in this tropical-like setting. Turns out we are following a group of kids who are essentially trapped in this giant, what turns out to be a maze. They live just on the land, essentially. Every month, a new box pops up from underground, and there is a new person included in that box. But on top of that, there's all the supplies they might need to survive, and then they just work all day and do their best to survive. But there are some that end up trekking through the maze every day. Of course, the maze is going to be filled with these deadly creatures and things like that, and the question is, how do we escape? That's really what we're looking at here. So the first movie is really an escape film. It's a survival film. How will we get through the maze, and how will we survive getting through the maze? And that's really what we're following here, and I just love that idea. And that's, I think, what drew me to this the first time I watched it. And actually, this film, this time through is the third time watching the original Maze Runner, and I've liked it every time. The only thing that really sticks with me is not even a negative, but it's something different, is I really thought there was more of the maze in this movie than there actually is. There's a ton of action that takes place at the home base, and just less than what I remember in the actual maze itself, which is not a bad thing necessarily. It's just different from what I remember it being. So the idea of something like Lord of the Flies, or even Lost, which is one of my favorite TV series of all time, that premise in here, I just love that. And so this just works for me on its most base level. But when we pick up the Maze Runner, it's the day that our main character here, Thomas, is arriving. And of course, because we're picking up on this day, of course Thomas has to be different. There's something special about this character that is going to change the course of events through that, of the people living in this maze. And they've been there for 3 years with no results really on how to get out of here. Well, enter Thomas, and 3 days later, things are going crazy, and it's just so much fun to watch. The creatures in this are called grievers, and I think they are so cool. They're like these giant spiders, almost scorpion-like creatures, but there's a mix of like this visceral just nastiness about them, but also robotics with them, something mechanical about them. And I love that combination. I really feel like there's some inspiration from Alien in this. I don't know necessarily about the Geiger, like the H.R. Geiger art style. It's just the way that these creatures are, the way they move about this universe. It reminded me a little bit of Alien, and I love that aspect of it. And like each of these movies kind of is going to have a different film that it reminds me of as I talk about them, as I go through them. But this one is kind of Lost meets Alien, or Lord of the Flies meets Alien. And again, I love all those things, so why wouldn't I enjoy the Maze Runner? So what's really cool about this also is that we have this group of basically teenage and preteen boys, which, what an obnoxious group of people to be around, typically speaking, right? At least in film, not necessarily in real life, but in film, they're just not the best characters to spend time with. But here, they actually are very enjoyable. They're much more mature than you would expect, and I think that works, given the fact that they're essentially living on the land for the last 3 years, at least most of these characters are. And so I just love the character interactions, the way that they each have their own jobs that they perform, that they've learned simply because they had to. I really like that aspect of it. There's a natural leader who was like the first person there when no one else was there. He was there alone for the first month, and that's just really, it works really well. And there's an emotional impact with that as well. And it's just, I really enjoyed the characters, and I think that's what drives this forward. And then after a few days, typically it's a month before the box rises again from the ground. Well, a few days later, we get our main female character in this, played by Kea Scodelario, who is fantastic. I love her from things like Crawl, which I've talked about on a 4K review here recently. She's an excellent actress, and she does a really good job in this. I don't love the character, but I'll talk about that a little bit more as the film franchise goes on. But I just really like the connection between these two as we're trying to figure out, how do they know each other? What is their past? Why are they here? And then what is Wicked? Because Wicked is good, is what we keep hearing in this movie, and especially in the second one. And so just trying to uncover this, or unravel this mystery, I think works really well. And you get very small glimpses of that in this first movie, but it really just sets it up for something really cool in the future film. So this film is just a mixture of a lot of different things that I really tend to enjoy. You have this, the horror aspects and sci-fi horror aspects with things like Alien almost feeling like it's an inspiration here with these creatures, which I think are done really well. And then you have the survival setting. Will they get out? Will they survive? Even if they get out, then what happens next, which we'll talk about in the next film. And it's like I said, a combination of things that I really enjoy. So of course, I had a great time with The Maze Runner. Definitely recommend this if for whatever reason you're watching and you haven't seen this yet. Absolutely recommend The Maze Runner. I ended up giving Maze Runner from 2014 4 out of 5 stars. The sequel came out 1 year later in 2015. This is Maze Runner: The Scorch Trials. So this one picks up exactly where the first one ends, and that's cool to me. I really love how all three of these just feel like one long film as opposed to like 3 different movies or 3 separate films. So that's really cool. But that said, this feels like a much different movie, and that's not a bad thing at all. So basically at the start of this one, our characters are in this, what's supposed to be basically their pathway to a safe haven. They're in this facility that is supposed to be protectors from Wicked. Well, it turns out that that's not exactly the case. We're introduced to a new main character here, to our new group with our Gladers, which is what our main characters are called. And he fits in the group really well. I enjoyed him as an addition here. And he introduces Thomas to the fact that things aren't exactly as they appear, and you might want to get out or you might not escape at all. And so that's exactly what they do. They escape, and then they are in this kind of wasteland of sorts, trying to figure out what is going on. Well, the flare, as it's known, the like disease that struck people, has turned these people into basically zombies. And so what this feels like to me is a mix of something like Resident Evil Extinction, which I'll talk about in a second, mixed with Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. So Dawn of the Dead, because you are getting these like fast moving zombies. Now, they're not zombies, they're not called that, and I don't even think you need to shoot them in the head from what I've seen in these films. You just need to take them out. So it's not exactly that, but it just feels that way. It feels, again, just like an inspiration. And then Resident Evil Extinction comes to mind just because of the landscapes in this. There's so much desert landscape and sand landscape that it really reminded me of Resident Evil Extinction. Kind of the same color palette, I guess I'll say, which is also showcased here on the box itself. But again, that's cool. I love Resident Evil Extinction, one of my favorite Resident Evil movies, so that's not a bad thing at all. This does suffer a little bit from being kind of that middle child of this trilogy, because it adds to the mythos of what's going on, but it's really there to set up the finale. And it does that really well while still being extremely entertaining, at least to me it was. Not only do we get introduced to our one new main character, but we also get introduced to another female character in this that will eventually become sort of a love interest to Thomas. And I think that is one of the things I didn't love about this trilogy, which I'll touch on that more in the next one, but I really think there was probably more character development in the books than in this trilogy of films. What Scorch Trials does do really well, though, is establish a really despicable antagonist for the rest of this series with Jansen. This guy just has a face you want to punch as he starts talking. Like, he is so, you can tell from the beginning he's slimy, and then as it goes on, as this trilogy concludes, it's just, I hate him. He's despicable. I cannot stand him at all, which is exactly what I should feel about him. And so I think they do that really well here. Eventually, the Gladers end up at the Scorch, which is where a lot of the final action sequences take place in this. And I think what this does really well is just establish what they're going to be doing in the third film. So obviously one of their groups gets captured, and so that's what the whole third film is about, trying to get him back. But on top of that, it sets up Teresa, K.S. Scotolario's character, as this kind of unexpected evil villain of sorts. Not exactly, but I really disliked her thanks to this movie. And then going into the third one, she made me so angry, which again is what I'm supposed to feel, I believe, as I'm watching this. But I like the action in this one. There's just not a whole lot of depth other than just, kind of adding a little bit to the Wicked aspects of this, finding out that Wicked is essentially everywhere. And then they're trying to find I think it's the right arm, the left arm or the right arm. I always mix it up. But yeah, trying to find that group. And you just get introduced to more characters, which is a lot of fun. And again, it's really here to set up the third film. So I really enjoyed this one still. It definitely is, it feels different than the other films, for better or for worse. So I ended up giving the Maze Runner The Scorch Trials from 2015 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it just as much as the first one, frankly. And then 3 years later, the trilogy finally concludes with Maze Runner: The Death Cure. And now this is not a 4K review or anything like that, but I'll mention this 4K disc looks fantastic. I was so blown away by it. And I think this is the only one I have on 4K, but I think benefits the most from 4K, just given the bright landscape of the first half of the movie, and then kind of the dark craziness and the lights of the big city in the second half of the film. So if you can get this on 4K, I absolutely recommend it. So with The Death Cure, we pick up 6 months later. You can tell in those 6 months, all our Gladers have been doing is prepping and planning, and that has brought them to the opening sequence of this film, which is this amazing, heist sequence, essentially. It is done so well, and it's just so over the top. You can feel the budget expanding. You know what? I forgot to look. The budget went from about 34 million in the first movie to over 60 million in the second movie. I have to check real quick what the budget was for this one. It was only $1 million more. It was from 61 million in Scorch Trials up to 62 million in Death Cure, but they just allocated it differently because this one hits different. It just feels bigger and boomier, I guess I'll say. There's so many more explosions and just big set pieces in this that work so well. It's so much fun to watch. So I've been comparing all of these to some other films that are maybe a little bit more popular, and to me, this one feels inspired by movies like Mad Max Fury Road, and especially Dredd. There are so many aspects of all three of those in this, and I like those a lot, especially those last two, Fury Road and Dredd. Those are fantastic movies. I love that dystopic, post-apocalyptic feel, that kind of metallic feel that you get in those films. I really love that, and that is this to the T. So that's why I really enjoyed this one. In Death Cure, the Gladers are essentially trying to break in to the last megacity in order to rescue Minho, who is basically the entire premise of this film. They need to rescue Minho. And that said, there's obviously something else going on there. Thomas clearly still has feelings for Teresa, which just was irritating to me. That's where a little bit of that YA romance or that teen romance comes in, and I was not interested in that at all. I was really glad the way this thing ends, where it's just not going to work out. But anyway, that said, that's what we're trying to do here, is break in. And then, of course, there is that aspect of trying to find the cure, hence the Death Cure title of this movie. And Thomas, obviously, is going to be the key to all of this. So the way it plays out at the end, again, a little bit frustrating because he does go back to his teen romance, which again is just kind of annoying, but I think other than that, it plays out really well. Like, our antagonists do such a great job. Jansen is very despicable in this one, even more so than the last movie. The ending, watching him get his comeuppance is incredibly fulfilling. And then I could say the same about Teresa as well, because again, there's spoilers. I shouldn't be afraid of talking spoilers. I loved that final sequence where Teresa goes down with the ship, essentially. She made her choice, and now she has to live with it. And Brenda, the other love interest, I'll talk about that a little bit too. So I think that one thing the book series probably does better, which I haven't read yet. I do want to now, but I have not read it. It has to do a better job building the relationships, because the Brenda and Thomas thing is almost non-existent in the second film, but then here it's almost as if we should have known that there was something going on behind the scenes, something kind of broiling underneath. But you don't really. Like, it's obviously there because they kind of force it in towards the end, but it doesn't feel earned. And so that relationship, I think, is something that could have been developed a little bit better. I don't know if it was just maybe a scene or two that could have been added or whatever, but you obviously have a lot less time in a film than you do in a book to establish that, but you can still do it. Millions of films have established relationships really well. This one, unfortunately, just doesn't do that very well. Death Cure is another one with just some awesome set pieces in it. I already talked about that opening sequence, which I think is phenomenal. But then there's that moment toward the end of the film where the Gladers literally jump out of like I don't even know how high up they are, like 15, 20-story building into this pool, essentially, and this fountain, really. And it just looks so awesome. Like, it looks great. All the special effects on this one are phenomenal. This is just a super enjoyable film. Yes, it is completely out of the realm of possibility, and you have to suspend your disbelief to really enjoy yourself, but I'm here for that. It very much feels like films like Dread, where it's just things are going to go bananas, and you just got to buckle up and enjoy the ride in order to have a good time, and that's exactly what I did with this one. So, unraveling the mystery, figuring out how Thomas actually is the cure to all this, the emotional impact of losing one of our main characters at the end, oh my gosh, I loved it. I was almost in tears because I'm a big softie, but this is a really fun film that I thoroughly enjoyed. And so, there are aspects of it I didn't love, like I already talked about, the relationships, and I don't know if there's really anything else that was weighing heavily on me, but when the finale of your film is built so much on these relationships, I just wish there was a little more time spent building those up to make them feel like they've earned that payoff. That said, still a super enjoyable film. So I am going to give Maze Runner: The Death Cure from 2018 4 out of 5 stars, meaning I gave all 3 of them 4 out of 5. So what am I going to rank these? Let's talk about that next. When I think back to the 3 questions I asked myself at the beginning of this review, does the Maze Runner trilogy hold up? Is it as good as I remember it being? And the third one, does it deserve to be talked about more than it does? For me, the resounding answer is an absolute yes. This is a trilogy that, for my money, has almost already been forgotten, and the last film only came out, only came out 5 years ago. That's not that long. And so how is this film franchise not talked about more? If you look at Rotten Tomatoes, which honestly, I'm not a big Rotten Tomatoes guy, but it helps illustrate my point here, so I'm going to use it. The first film has a 65%. That's fine. But then the second and third one have a 48 and a 42% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's crazy to me because I'm not sure what you'd be looking for coming into this franchise other than big, dystopic, apocalyptic action. And that's exactly what the Maze Runner trilogy delivers on. I feel the story of Wicked, unraveling it does so at a great pace that I'm never bored. I'm always intrigued about what the next layer is going to be from Wicked and what the actual final cure is going to be. Admittedly, it's a little bit predictable given everything leading up to it, but that's okay. The end, the finale, the set pieces. This is just a really fun film franchise that absolutely needs to be talked about more. So I am first, before I give my overall rating, I'm going to rank them. So coming in at number 3, pretty obvious to guess, I would say, is Maze Runner: The Scorch Trials. Again, great movie that I thoroughly enjoyed, but when you pit it up against the other two, this definitely feels like the middle child. So I'm putting that one at number 3. And then number 2 on the list is going to be the original. I really enjoyed this one. It sets the premise for a lot of things I love watching, and it's great. I love the creatures in this are done so well also. Like, it's just a really strong movie, which of course leads number 1 as The Death Cure. And this is just, if you like Dread, if you like Mad Max Fury Road, you'll probably enjoy this. Obviously, you have to watch the other two first to really enjoy what's going on here, to understand and appreciate what's going on here. But oh man, this finale delivers it delivers tenfold. It was a blast to watch. I thoroughly enjoyed this one as well. So coming in at number 1 is The Death Cure. So with that said, what do I rate the Maze Runner trilogy overall? You probably guessed it. 4 out of 5 stars. A fantastically fun trilogy that definitely deserves more attention than it gets. All right, so those were my thoughts on the Maze Runner trilogy, but I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments. Have I oversold this? Do you think it's not nearly as good as I do? Let me know what you think of this one. Obviously, there are a lot of people out there who don't love it quite as much as I do, but I'm going to guess there are some fans amongst my viewers as well. So let me know what your thoughts are on the Maze Runner trilogy. Is there other dystopic YA trilogies you would like me to review down the line? I would love to look at The Hunger Games next because I've only ever seen the original film. I need to make my way through that as well. So maybe I'll watch that in the near future here. But anyway, leave comments. I appreciate all of them regardless of what they are. But that is it for today, guys. So if you enjoyed this one, please hit that like button down below. And if you didn't, hit that thumbs down. That lets me know I need to change what I'm doing. Any feedback is always appreciated. So thank you so much for that. And like I always say, I don't just talk movies. I talk all things media. Books, movies, video games, graphic novels, manga, records. If it's media related, I'm interested in it. And if you are too, you might consider subscribing. All right, guys, so that's going to do it for today. I just want to say thank you all so much for watching, and I want to encourage you to consume some media today. I'll catch you next time.